I'm Sandy Lowries and welcome to the Good Girl Confessional. 180 years ago, Australia's first children's book was published by an anonymous writer known only as a Lady Long resident in New South Wales. The identity of that author remained one of Australia's most puzzling literary mysteries until 1981, when she was finally given a name, Charlotte Waring Atkinson. And today in the confessional, I am so happy to be chatting with Kate Forsyth and Belinda Murrell, sisters who are both celebrated authors in their own right. Kate and Belinda grew up on the stories of Charlotte's life as she was their great-great-great-great-grandmother. A best-selling author, Charlotte was also an artist and a pioneer in the fight for women's legal rights, waging a bitter court battle for the right to raise her own children in a time when it was unheard of. In searching for Charlotte, Kate and Belinda started a journey of discovery that investigates their family history, writing and motherhood. But more importantly, they have shone a light on Charlotte Waring Atkinson's amazing achievements and her importance in the world of Australian and women's literature. I welcome Kate and Belinda. Hi, and welcome to the Good Girl Confessional, Kate Forsyth and Belinda Murrell.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. I'm very, very excited to have both of you on to talk about your beautiful new book.
I know.
And here it is. Yay, we've all got one. Which is, of course, called Searching for Charlotte.
Searching for Charlotte, yes.
Oh, and what a beautiful, beautiful premise the story is. It's real. This is a true story of you guys looking for history on now I'll get this right, your great-great-great-great-grandmother.
Absolutely perfect.
Well done.
Who is Charlotte. Now, am I saying her name right? Charlotte Waring.
Waring.
Waring. Charlotte Waring. Okay. So how did this journey begin for you?
Well, I guess it began for us when we were very little girls, because we were brought up on the stories of our ancestor who had written Australia's first children's book. It was just part of our childhood, our kind of, romantic ancestry that our grandparents liked to tell us.
Yeah, absolutely. So what they used to do is they used to take us on these long journeys down to the Southern Highlands, and as we were driving down, they'd tell us these stories. We'd go down this bumpity road and we'd come to this beautiful old house that was built by our great-great-great-grandparents. We'd peer through the tangled hedges and look at this beautiful house, and that was how our fascination began, as they told us these stories.
We always wished that the house still belonged to us, but then we were told about how the house had been lost generations ago. And so when we were little, Belinda and I used to imagine that we'd make our fortune and buy the house back for the family. It's privately owned. It's one of the most beautiful examples of colonial architecture that's still in private hands.
Oh, wow. And are they, obviously they must be aware now of the extraordinary history of their home.
I've been lucky enough to actually go there and visit Oldbury, and the current owner, who's a very private person, I wrote to him a few years ago and begged him. I was at the time writing my novel, The River Charm, which was inspired by the Atkinson family. And I begged him if we could go and see it. And he was saying, oh, look, no. And then he relented, and he rang me and he said, all right, we're having this wonderful garden party. Why don't you bring your sister and bring your mum and bring your stepfather and all come along and have a look at the house. And so that was, and the thing about that was I had been writing this book for a year, and as we crossed the paddock in the first time we'd actually been through the front gate, and I started to sob and I was crying, and Kate's going, it's okay. And it was just such a wonderful emotional experience to actually finally go to this place and be part of both of our imaginations since we were little girls.
Yeah, it was a really, really moving moment. So I guess for us, the fact that we grew up with these stories, everyone in our family are wonderful old storytellers, and we were always keen to hear the stories, and so they were sort of engraven upon our own memory. Charlotte Waring's book, A Mother's Offering to Her Children, by a Lady Long resident in New South Wales, it was published almost 180 years ago. 2021 is the 180th anniversary of the publication of her book. And so Belinda and I, we were at an award ceremony. There's a children's literary award that has been named in her honour. And we were there at the award ceremony, and we told the story of this incredibly dramatic true story of how Charlotte came to write Australia's first children's book. And everyone afterwards kept saying to us, this is the most incredible story. How can no one know about it? You must write about it. And so Belinda and I, in the cab home after the awards ceremony, we turned to each other and we said, we've got to do it, because, you know, in a couple of years, it'll be the 180th anniversary. And if we don't do it then, well, the next big anniversary is the 200th. And who knows where we'll be in 23 years' time. And so that was the beginning of our journey with this particular book. It was almost 3 years ago to the day. And this book has dominated our lives, obsessed us, challenged us, and also brought us so much joy. It's been an incredible transformative journey for us as well as anyone who reads it.
Absolutely.
I'm so pleased that you did write it, because it is beautiful. Not only the aesthetic of the book, which clearly is quite beautiful. I mean, look at this. And it seems very fitting for such an extraordinary woman to have her story told in an aesthetically beautiful book. But it's so beautifully written. And I think what I quite loved was your journey to find out more about her, and her, you know, her strength is extraordinary. But there is really. The beautiful way in which you write about her, it's almost like a little bit with reverence. Is that correct? Is that fair?
Yes, I think so. I think what was really special about this book is the fact that as family members, I think we wrote about her with an enormous amount of affection and passion and love, and a real caring about what happened to her, which is, I think, comes out in the story, this really personal connection that we have with her, which I think is far more interesting than a dry, boring academic biography where you're talking about someone you've never met, you don't know anything about. And so, yes, I think that was part of the beauty of this project for us.
Yes, and I don't think that we could have done it any other way, because we were so emotionally invested in the story, and our sense of reverence for Charlotte only grew as we uncovered more and more of her story. When we were children, we just lapped up all the family stories, but then when we grew up and became cynical adults, we began to think, oh, this can't be true. You know, it's so, these old family stories must have been embellished and glamorized. But one of the most astonishing things for us was to discover empirical evidence that proved the truth, or the how much of those oral stories actually carry truth within them. And that was a real surprise to us. We thought we were going to be debunking a few of the family myths, and instead what we've done is we've found that our grandparents and our great-grandparents and our great-great-great-grandparents were passing down true stories, and that's really beautiful.
In fact, I think actually we discovered that Charlotte was more extraordinary than we thought when we started out, which was quite surprising, because I think I started out being very, we've got to be really careful, and we've got to be double check and triple check our facts, and make sure that we're not just romanticizing the whole thing. And so I think that was really a really interesting part of the process, was to discover how much of it really was true, and what an amazing woman she really was.
Yeah, so strong and so resilient, and she suffered so much. Her story is, it's a classic heroine's journey, where a young woman sets out on this voyage of self-discovery and to find her way in life. And she suffers grief and loss and violence and injustice. I think the key to her story is this struggle against the injustice of the patriarchal system, which insisted that just because she was a woman, that meant she had no more sense than a doll, I think I say in the book. And she set out to prove that was not true. Her battle to keep the custody of her own children, which is a great moment of triumph in the book. I mean, it is one of the most important legal battles in Australian feminist history. And I can't believe that she's not more widely celebrated.
I think that's one of the things that really resonated for me, was that her story hasn't been told? And as you say, even if it was in a boring text, or why aren't we learning more about her? I did literary studies at university. I know that my daughter has followed in my footsteps and has done literary studies at university. And by the way, she's itching to get her hands on this because
good.
because she thought it was extraordinary. And I said, you can't have it yet, but she can have it after this.
Oh, that's lovely. Yes, I think the thing is that a lot of 19th century women and colonial women were invisible, and their stories have been forgotten, lost, ignored mostly. And I think that's so wrong. And that was one of the things Kate and I wanted to redress with this, was not just to celebrate Charlotte's story, but to celebrate the fact that her story is probably not as unusual as we think, and that there were lots of strong women who did amazing things back then, but their stories weren't considered and still aren't considered by many people to be important.
That's right. I mean, history is full of the stories of unjustly forgotten women. And I think that it's our job as writers to help discover some of those stories. And then, I like to say that we've rescued her from, being
Oblivion,
forgotten.
perhaps. Oblivion, perhaps.
Yeah.
You've definitely rescued her from obscurity. I mean, I think... Which is fabulous. And isn't it extraordinary that when we don't know about this woman, how can we not know about this woman, when she has paved the way for every female writer in this country who was writing for children? It was such a difficult battle back then for women to get published, and she was the first.
Yes. Sorry, I've just lost my train there. We both need to answer it at the same time.
One of the things that I think is so interesting is putting Charlotte Waring Atkinson back into literary history and comparing her to the struggles of women who were writing at the same time. One of the things that we did while we were researching this book is we went on this amazing research trip with our daughters. It was a sister, mother, daughter, cousin adventure road trip, and we went to the UK and we followed in Charlotte's footsteps, but we also made literary pilgrimages to the homes of some of the writers who were her contemporaries, in particular Jane Austen and the Bronte sisters.
The Bronte sisters, yeah.
The Bronte sisters were born before Charlotte, and Jane Austen was born after Charlotte.
No, other way around. Jane Austen was born before Charlotte, and then the Bronte sisters were born after Charlotte. So she was born pretty much halfway between the two. So yes, that was an amazing thing. But the other thing that was really interesting was this idea of education of women that Charlotte was so passionate about, was educating girls. And back in those days, 60% of women couldn't even write their own name when they got married. And yet here was Charlotte determined to teach her children about conchology and the botany and geology and the natural sciences and literature and all of these amazing things that she was not only wanting to teach her daughters, but teach the other children of Australian colonial society. And I think that's one of the other things I really admire about her, is her just absolute passion for girls' education.
She was a pioneer educator in this country, and she was a proto-feminist as well. I think that's really important to understand. I talk about how cleverly she framed the book, where, at the time that she was writing, it was not considered proper for women to be taught. There were no universities for women, for example. There were no colleges for them. Education for girls was little more than their alphabet and a few numbers and how to sew in their catechism. And she was passionate about the importance of educating young women, but she did so in such a way that she couldn't be overtly criticised, by the patriarchal dominant narrative. And so she very cleverly framed her book as a series of conversations with her children, where her children would ask her questions about the natural world and about history, and then she would tell them a story and educate them through this really warm, loving, engaging conversation, rather than lecturing them and making them bored and restless. I think it was really clever.
It was very clever. It was this idea of storytelling, teaching through storytelling, which was very innovative for the early 19th century. People are only just coming to grips with that now.
I agree. And I thought that was so beautiful, that her story. And I know in the beginning of the book, and forgive me, I can't remember which one of you said this, but one of you wrote that perhaps, looking at it now, it seems a little bit old-fashioned and quite quaint.
Yes, that was me, yes.
It was you? And I loved that. It stayed with me because I actually, when I think back to, say, children's stories that I was reading, when I was a very small child, that my kids would look at that and think, what?
Yes.
But I do think it's, you're right. While it's a quaint idea, it's actually so pioneering. And as you say, there are teachers now who still resist the idea of teaching through storytelling.
Yes, I know. That was one of the I guess the themes we explored in the book was we're talking about some things that happened nearly 200 years ago, yet so many things haven't changed, and that women's education and women's rights and domestic violence and sexual violence, all of these things are still major issues for women today that were things that Charlotte had to battle and struggle and triumph over all those years ago.
Oh, absolutely.
It's still very relevant, isn't it? Which is such a shame. We would have thought that in the 180, 200 years since Charlotte was struggling with all of these issues, that we would have seen more progress, as humans. But no, these are still things that young women have to struggle with today. And I think that makes Charlotte's story very relevant.
Oh, it's extraordinarily relevant for sure.
Take our children away from us now simply because we decided to leave our husband.
Yeah. But unfortunately, this can still happen in countries around the world. And so you're right. It's such a relevant sort of topic. And, her battle to keep her children, I know myself as a parent, and you don't have to be a parent to understand this. I mean, I cannot imagine the extraordinary strength it took this woman. It took Charlotte to stand up against the authorities, to stand up against society and say, you're not having them.
Yes, I know. She was like a little tigress fighting because she wasn't very tall, and I can just imagine her just fighting and so determined not to let them take them away. In fact, they wanted to give the children to a guardian, and so they chose a young man who was about 23 or 24. He'd only been in the colony for a few weeks, and he didn't know the kids at all, but they thought that he would make a better guardian for the children than their own mother, which is just ludicrous now to us. But at the time, that was common practice.
Yeah, just insanity, isn't it? And what I love as well is this whole, the idea, though, that Charlotte started to sort of write. She published this book really as a way to actually earn an income.
Yes. Absolutely, because she at the time she and the children were literally starving. So it's crazy to think about it, but James Atkinson, her first husband, left this amazing estate. Like there was multiple properties. It was thousands and thousands of acres, hundreds of sheep, cattle, animals. An enormous estate was left to her, and simply by the misfortune of remarrying, suddenly Charlotte went from being of controlling all of that money, controlling those estates, and suddenly all of that was taken away from her. And so I think, it's just extraordinary the battle that she had to go through to fight the courts for those children and to just have the right to even decide how they were educated. The court said, oh no, you can't educate them. They have to go off to boarding school. And so she was saying, but I'm, one of the most qualified teachers in the world. Of course I can educate my children.
Yeah, wow.
It was a great battle for her. And I think that what was so interesting about it is that she had the courage to challenge, society's norm, this idea that, a genteel woman should not work, and that a genteel woman should not, teach her own children. She challenged those accepted ideas of how women should be, and she did what she thought best, and that must have taken enormous courage, I think, enormous strength of character. That's one of the things that I think we admire her most for.
Absolutely. She was just so inspiring and so strong and so brave and courageous, and I think she passed those traits on to her daughters in particular, especially Charlotte Elizabeth, who was our great grandmother, who was also very strong like her mother.
Yeah, and I think what's really lovely through this book as well, and possibly because, your sisters who came together to sort of write the book. I mean, you not came together to write the book. You probably were already together, but you wrote the book. But I think what's really gorgeous about this is this sense of the lineage of not just the fact that you two are both extraordinary writers in your own right and quite celebrated writers in your own right, that you both end up writing for children.
Yes.
But there's this kind of lineage of strength and courage of the women in your family that comes through in this book.
And I think a lot of that storytelling as well. I know our grandmother, when she would tell stories, at the time I didn't really realize it, but she would tell stories about lots of our ancestors, and in hindsight many of them had this theme of these strong women who had to deal with overwhelming odds, yet managed to do it with dignity and grace and courage, and to lead meaningful lives and to have these amazing creative lives as well, to work hard, this sense of working hard, but also fulfilling their creativity and their aspirations. So she would tell us these stories, and our mother as well. So she obviously grew up on the same stories. So she kept repeating them to us, and we repeat them to our daughters.
Which is fabulous. And there's a beautiful picture when people buy this book. There's a beautiful picture of your mum actually in this book. There's
many so glamorous, doesn't she?
So your mum, very glamorous indeed. But yeah, it's. I think that's really lovely. And are your children, your daughters, are they writers as well? Do they tend to sort of lean to the creative?
My daughter, yes, my daughter's studying, just finished a double degree. So she's doing journalism, media, and then on the other side, creative writing and literature. And she's just finished a 4-month internship at Walker Books Publishing children's books, where she's been working and loving it, absolutely loving it. So she's living the dream at the moment. And so obviously she feels like it's a crown that's been handed down through the generations. And I feel like she thinks she's going to be a wonderful writer too. And I hope she does. She loves it.
Oh,
we had a beautiful time with our daughters, traveling around the UK with them. It was a really special time. And I think it really helped us come to understand Charlotte's life in a way that we wouldn't have if our daughters had not been with us. For me, my daughter Ella was 15 years old when we travelled together. And that was the same age that Charlotte was sent out to teach, to become a governess. She was only 15 years old, and I never really thought about that before, but having my own daughter there and knowing how young she was, the idea of her having to go off and live in someone else's home and teach and be in charge of young children, and her loneliness and her vulnerability, it really made it so much more poignant to me and made me understand a little of Charlotte's struggles when she was a young woman as well.
Absolutely. And even more so when she was a little bit older. My daughter was 21 at the time. And when Charlotte was 21, she was working way, way up in the north of England. She was days and days and days away from her home and her family. And I think that must have been one of the loneliest periods in her life. So yes, it was wonderful to walk in Charlotte's footsteps. It really transformed for me. We'd done about a year of research by then, and we had all the dates and we had all the major events that had happened in her life, but it hadn't quite come to life for me yet. And then when we went to England, and we were actually walking the same cobblestones that she'd walked years before, and we could look up and we could see the house where she lived as a young girl, and we went to visit the house where her family lived for generations, or where she'd worked as a governess. And to me, that brought her story to life. It was almost like we could almost see inside her thoughts and her emotions when we were walking in her footsteps. It was just such an amazing experience.
And that really does come through in the book. There is this kind of almost excitement at moments. I'm reading your excitement, through the book when you found certain things. In terms of research, because this is such an extraordinarily researched book as well. And although it's not stayed, and thank goodness it's not stayed, it's a really beautiful personal story. It's so alive and it's so beautiful. And it's a beautiful story about you two, of your daughters, of finding things, of disappointment sometimes, yes. I think, of not finding the things you wanted, but incredible excitement on the other side of that, of finding things that you didn't even know existed or were real.
That's right.
So what was that journey like, the actual research and how did you even begin? Because although you have the stories.
You know, the research was, of course, very, very intensive, and we were going, we were finding and looking for things that we didn't even know existed when we found them. Luckily, both Belinda and I have a lot of experience in this area. Belinda's written a lot of books that draw upon history for younger readers, and most of my books are historical novels for adults, and they've all been extremely intensive research projects, and so that meant that we had the right tools to begin. As well as that, I was lucky enough to be awarded a fellowship with the State Library of New South Wales that holds one of the largest Atkinson archives in the world. And so I had a room there. I was able to go and spend quite a lot of time at the library digging through their archives. We spent a lot of time down at the National Library of Canberra that has another very extensive archive down there. The National Library holds Charlotte's shipboard journal, which she wrote on her journey out from England to Australia in the 1820s, and Belinda transcribed that, which I don't know.
Which took weeks and weeks and weeks. It's impossible to read.
It was such a work of detection, I suppose, literary detection, deciphering all this old handwriting. What we did, which I think was really, really in hindsight, very wise of us, is when we decided to write this book, we sat down together. We actually went out for lunch. We ordered a bottle of champagne. We talked about what we were going to do. And then we drew up a list of what we thought were the key chapters or key scenes in Charlotte's life. And then we decided that we would divide the book between us, and that each of us would be responsible for one major chapter of Charlotte's life. We would do all the research, we would do all the writing, and we would have complete creative freedom in our own chapters. So instead of it being written by both of us and us arguing over small points, or both of us doing research and finding, we actually were able to choose what we wanted. And I know it sounds astonishing, but we chose really, really swiftly and easily. Basically, Belinda went, I'd really like to write that chapter. And I went, that's good, because I really want to write this chapter. And we went down, we just divided the book evenly between us. And then we just set to work, working on our parts of the book. Now, we did think in our naivety that this meant we were only really writing half a book, and so that it should be easier.
We thought it should be much swifter as well. I mean, I know how long it takes me to write one book by myself. It shouldn't take twice as long to write half a book, but it did.
But it did, that's right. Because the research was so slow and so difficult, and also because we kept going down like research rabbit holes where we wanted to find out absolutely everything about her life. But of course, a lot has been lost, or there's no historical record. There's this incredibly poignant story about Charlotte Waring Atkinson's granddaughter, the daughter of her youngest daughter, Louisa Atkinson, who was actually the first Australian-born female novelist in this country. Louisa Atkinson dropped dead by the cradle of her newborn daughter, whose name was Louise Calvert. And Louise Calvert grew up practically an orphan because her father also died young. And when Louise Calvert was, 14 or 15 years old, she was, Oldbury was being sold, and she was told that she could go to Oldbury and take whatever she could carry. And so this young woman, 14 or 15 years old, walked
5 kilometres from the church, and then had to walk 5 kilometres back, carrying everything she could hold.
And that's all that was saved. Everything else was burnt. So any other diaries, letters, first editions of the book, which is now worth about $80,000, sketchbooks, art, everything was burnt. And this little girl carrying an armful of what she could save.
It's amazing what she saved. I can't imagine how she carried it all, but she was such a brave little cherub, I think, and we're so grateful to her, because everything that we used were the things that she saved from that bonfire.
And we just keep thinking, what else was burnt that day? that is gone forever. We can only imagine what other treasures were lost that day. So, it was an incredible journey of discovery for us. The research was incredibly intensive and took us a very long time. And then, of course, we had that terrible creative dilemma. What do you use? What do you keep in? What do you throw out? What is going to be of interest to us? Is it going to be of interest to the general reader? And so we had to think very carefully about, our mantra was, it's all very interesting, but is it relevant?
Exactly.
Right, because I think you've done an extraordinary job of telling her story and actually including things that seriously are riveting and keep you going forward. You just want to know. I kept wanting to know more and more about her.
Story, isn't it? And I think in the beginning, when we were first thinking about it, we were actually thinking about it as being more like a traditional biography. Because we were just so fascinated with her life. And then when we started talking to the National Library about it, they said, well, actually, we don't want a traditional biography. What we actually want is we want to have the memoir elements of it, which I was a bit, oh, really? And to hear about our journey to discover the truth and to hear about our oral history and growing up hearing these stories and to have it as a sort of a search for family history as well as a memoir of our life, growing up as writers in a family where writing has always been celebrated and rejoiced in.
And I think it was a great piece of advice or, direction, from the National Library, because I do think the book is so much more warm and intimate and authentic and real. And we were allowed to write in our own voices and to share with the reader our own struggles and challenges and the difficulties of discovering this story. So it's not just a story about this incredible woman in the 1830s and 1840s, making literary history for Australia. It's a story about what it's like for us to have grown up in a family that has so many writers in it.
And I think that is so mind-blowing. And one of the reasons why I was really thrilled to speak to both of you, because I just find this so extraordinary. I mean, my daughter said to me, do you think it is because is it nurture or nature?
Yes, exactly. So many people ask that, and is writing in your blood? And of course we say, of course it is, but I think it's a combination. It's part of it might be that knowing that there are other published authors in the family, you think it's something that's achievable, which perhaps other people don't think. And also I think we've always been encouraged. We're very tiny, when we were tiny children, our mum would always encourage us to write. That was the thing she'd say. She would be having a dinner party and she'd say, why don't you write a poem for all of my guests that are coming? Off you go. And we'd write plays and put them on, and mum would sit there and watch, and she'd let us rate her wardrobe for the costumes. And so we were always encouraged to write and always encouraged to read, and our grandparents were the same. So I think it was being brought up in this very creative household where creativity was valued and encouraged. And I think that's a huge part of how we become writers, I think.
I'm often asked this question, and I say the thing about having been brought up in a family where you knew that women in your past had written and published books, I think it gave us permission to dream. And I think that is actually the great gift. It gave us permission to dream of writing and being published and making our dreams come true. And if I was to give anyone any advice about how to raise their children, that is what I would ask them to give them. The ability to dream of what they could be and then permission to go for it.
And did you both always know that this was going to be, you wrote since you were children, but did you always sort of think that's what I'm going to do when I grow up? I'm going to be a published author.
I did.
You did.
I always knew that I was going to be a writer. I've never, ever, ever wavered in that ambition. And my earliest books, which I wrote when I was about 7 or 8, they actually have a little publication page, and I've got, the title, and then I go, by Katie Humphrey, which is, my maiden name. Then I would have published London, New York, and Sydney. But
I used to do the same thing. So I'd self-publish and have my publishing plate and all the rest of it. So yes, I always loved writing. But as I was growing up, our father was a vet. We grew up in a vet hospital. So my whole life I wanted to be a vet because I just loved animals so much. I was always helping Dad. In fact, I did an operation on a calf at my brother's farm on the weekend. And so that was something that I always wanted to do. But unfortunately, I didn't inherit my father's amazing ability with chemistry and mathematics and biology and physics. In fact, I struggled right through to my HSC with these sciences. And then when I was in year 12, my principal pulled me aside and she said, Belinda, you're such an amazing writer. You're topping English at school. You're topping history at school. You're struggling to pass chemistry and maths and physics, and perhaps being a vet, as much as you love animals, isn't the best career for you. Have you ever thought about going into journalism, writing, and so on? And my mother had been saying that to me for years, but I didn't listen to her. It wasn't until my principal said it to me with so much authority, I thought perhaps she's right, and I immediately switched and switched my university degree to media and creative writing. So yes, and so that was a very wise choice, I think.
Yes, well done to your principal, because
yes. Our guidance of our teachers can be so incredibly important to us, can't they?
Extremely important. So I think, like both of yourselves, I think I grew up as a storyteller in my family, and I don't know that it was necessarily passed down, but my mum used to say, bless her, but she'd say from the moment you could talk, you were always, even before anyone understood what you were saying, you were babbling. You were always quite expressive and telling people stories. And I think sometimes, it just is, it's so in you. And I remember thinking I wanted to be a coroner of all things when I was in high school. Like, what? Why? And again, a really great teacher at my school said, English is your this is where you're going to be. And as much as you think you want to, examine dead bodies, I just really can't see it. And
you should be writing crime fiction.
Yes. Exactly. That's funny. That's it. But she's a published writer as well and wrote for young adult novels as well. So I thank you, Carol Jones, for that great advice not to be a coroner. I did not have the brain capacity for it either, Belinda. So.
I think your brain's one thing or the other. You can't really do both, I don't think.
I think it's so fascinating because, when you look at someone, you can tell if they've inherited blue eyes or blonde hair or brown hair or, any number of physical attributes are visible to the eye. But what we inherit inside us is not visible. And so I think, things like creativity, I think the desire or, the love of talking and telling stories, I think these are things that we do inherit. But what matters with them is what we do with the gifts that we are given. And so both Belinda and I have been writing all of our lives. We've made our living from our writing since we finished, our undergraduate degrees. We've practiced a craft, we've studied hard, and we work awfully hard. And I think that matters as well.
Oh,
yes,
absolutely.
And I think it's that combination of encouragement, it's a technique, it's using the techniques. And so I think sometimes I thought when I was younger, my dad was an amazing musician, and I thought that somehow I could just inherit that ability without ever having to practice the instruments. And so, yes, I think that was the lesson I learned quite young, that you actually have to practice these things or they don't come to you.
So true.
Yeah, it is really fascinating, isn't it? I have as I said, a daughter who has gone into literary studies but really wants to be an editor, which is quite interesting for me because I'm the opposite side of that. So she's quite really the nuts and bolts of it, which is really fascinating. But that in of itself is really creative.
Yes, absolutely.
A great editor can just transform a book. I think a great editor's job is to help the writer be the very best writer they can be. And we were incredibly lucky at the National Library because we worked with a wonderful team. The book, isn't just beautiful from the outside, but they worked with us on the inside of it as well. And we're very grateful to them for that because, one of the things that we did is we decided not to criticize each other too much in the pursuit of sisterly happiness. And so having a really great editor who could be an arbitrator for us, I think really helped as well.
And she was really good at some of the sort of, I just love editors who are really nitpicky and pedantic and so on, because you get lost in the big picture of what you're trying to achieve. And then she'll say something, do you realise that? And you go, oh, no, I never noticed that bit, you know. So it's really great sometimes to have a good editor. Well, it's always great to have a good editor.
That's great. And in terms of you two working together, because this is your first time to come together and
it's
work?
been about 7, yes.
Wow. Okay. And how was that experience for both of you?
Yeah, I think it was an absolutely amazing experience. I think my husband was a little bit worried at the beginning. He was worried that we might, you know, never speak to each other again, or that we might have a terrible fight and fragment the family forever. But no, it was we've always been very close. And I think working on this project together has brought us even closer. That's not to say we didn't have some very passionate discussions and disagreements along the way, but we managed to sort them out. And I think part of that was just having, respecting the creative freedom of the other person to work on their chapters and cover what they believed they should cover in those chapters, and the way we divided it up so that we were writing about our passions or the things that interested us the most.
I think we also had a lot of trust in each other. I think that, you know, when it comes to collaborating with someone else, I think that you need to, you know, give them room to make their own creative discoveries, give them a chance to play and experiment and work out what they want to do. Don't close down creativity too early on in the creative process, and then trust them. Trust that they have a strong sense of what they're doing and that they will find their way through. I think this is really, really important, because I have had friends who have collaborated with other people and they have ended up feeling that, you know, one wants to be in charge of everything and keeps ordering the other person around, or another person's not doing enough of the work. Well, because we divided it up between us and we were very, very careful about the boundaries between what we were doing, I don't think we ran into any of those problems, which was good.
Fortunately, we're still speaking to each other, which is great.
I can see that.
You know, we only live 5 minutes away from each other. And so we would probably once or twice a week, sometimes even more often, we would walk together with our dogs up and down the ocean front at Manly, and would talk through a lot of things and would share our different challenges or moments when we felt despair because we couldn't find what we wanted to find, and would comfort each other and support each other and give each other guidance when we were in trouble. So we were constantly in contact over the book. We weren't, you know, and we were constantly sharing our work back and forth. We just weren't interfering with the others.
There was a couple of times where I'd wake up in the morning and there'd be a text from Kate saying, ring me the moment you wake up, now. Okay, what is it? I want this. And so there were many great moments of excitement where we discovered something that we didn't know. And then suddenly that we couldn't wait to tell the other person about it. And I think we got so lost in the story. There was a time when we were having a family dinner together, and I was talking to Kate about how sad I felt about Charlotte Elizabeth losing her son, who was 19, the same age as our boys at the time. And I was getting teary, and I was just saying, you know, I just can't believe she lost him at that age. And then my brother-in-law Greg saying, well, how can you get upset about people who died so long ago? And we're going, but to us that, you know, they're not people who died so long ago. We'd spent so long living with them and having this empathy with them that I spent many a time crying over things that happened to them and laughing over things that happened to them and celebrating their joy as well.
And I think you've given that also to the reader. So, you know, there were moments that I read where I was a bit overcome at times with moments in this book for things that perhaps Charlotte had endured and was living through. And you write it so beautifully. But also, you know, that's testament to the writers that you both are as well, that you took the reader on that journey and you gave her spirit to us as well.
You know, we did think of it as being this journey of discovery, this journey of transformation. And so that's exactly what we were hoping the reader would feel, that they were traveling on that journey with us, that they were feeling our moments of frustration and disappointment and exhaustion, and then also feeling the moments of discovery and triumph and that, you know, our feeling of connection with Charlotte would be communicated to the reader as well, and they would come out at the end of the book feeling that they knew us and they knew her and that they had traveled the journey with us.
I think for me, that was one of the greatest challenges, was this idea of having to bring it's so easy for me to write about other people, but to write about myself and my family, that was, to me, was really difficult, and it took me some time to figure out how I was going to actually manage that and actually cope with that. So that for me, that was probably one of the biggest challenges. The research I loved, I could get lost in that research for months and months and months and months and have to stop myself. But and I think that was one of the great things that happened when we went on the trip to the UK, was actually I figured out how to that it was really important and how to do it, and it just took me a bit of time to get there.
And do you think taking both of your daughters on that trip to the UK was helpful in terms of writing about family, Belinda?
Yes, absolutely. To them, it was like such a great adventure, to us as well, of course. And like a treasure hunt. We were on this amazing treasure hunt, and everything we discovered was just so exciting. And we felt like detectives kind of creeping around looking for things. And then we'd find these things and just, we couldn't believe it.
And do you think the girls understand how incredible this has been as yet, or do you think as they get older they will look back and realize, wow, I was part of something so magnificent?
I think they know, especially
Emily, because she was 21 when we went, and she's just finished her degree, so she's kind of absolutely adored being on this journey. She's just absolutely so excited. She keeps coming and asking me, what's happening now, and so she's just loved being part of every single tiny detail of the journey.
One of my favorite things that happened while we were on our journey was I bought Ella, who was 15, a copy of Pride and Prejudice, and the girls read it out loud while we were driving through the English. We had a couple of very long drives, and the girls read it, and they took different parts, and they're putting on all of the voices. Now, Pride and Prejudice is one of our favourite books. Both Belinda and I are very passionate lovers of Jane Austen, and Emily had always loved Jane Austen as well, but my daughter had not caught the bug. And I'd given her other books and she never read them. Anyway, she caught the bug.
Yay!
And she's just started her HSC year now, and she's drawing upon Pride and Prejudice as one of her comparative texts, and I can't tell you how happy that makes me, because I now feel that we've given her the gift of Jane Austen that she might not have otherwise have.
You should have seen us when we went to Jane Austen's house, and there's all of us there, and Emily's wearing the bonnet, and we're going through Jane Austen's house, and then Kate and I at different times just both burst into tears. When I saw Jane Austen's little desk with a little quill there in the corner of the drawing room with a squeaky door, and I just burst into tears. It was just such a lovely, so it fulfilled a lifelong dream. I've wanted to go to Jane Austen's to Chawton since I was, probably at university. So to take our girls there was so wonderful. And I had been to Haworth to the Bronte Parsonage before with my daughter when she was 1. So it was nice to go back when she was 20.
Oh, yeah.
I cried at Jane Austen's house when I read the letter that Jane Austen's sister Cassandra wrote after Jane's death, where she said something along the lines that, she had lost her dearest friend, her sister. And I'm reading this and I'm crying, and my sister comes up and gives me this great big cuddle. It was really beautiful moment together in the Jane Austen house. So yeah, it was an incredible journey for all of us, I think, and so special to do it with our daughters.
Yeah, beautiful. And one of the other lovely things in the book that you talk about while you're there with your daughters is obviously you stay with family, you meet family. What is the impression now that the book is completed? What's the family collective? What are they thinking? How are they feeling about it?
Well, I think the whole family is extremely proud of us. I think they understand that it was a very difficult challenge, and that I think that they are proud of us because we rose to the challenge, and have created a very beautiful book. I think that they hope that all the work that we've done will draw attention to Charlotte and to her story, which is so dramatic and such a story of struggle and triumph. And I think they hope that we will see Charlotte being a little bit more celebrated now. I mean, that's certainly our hope. Next year is the 180th anniversary of the publication of A Mother's Offering to Her Children. And we would quite like to see a year full of celebration for her.
Of course we would.
And someone, we did a radio interview with Richard Glover a couple of weeks ago, and someone rang in and said that she should have a suburb named after her, or street named after her, or she should have her face.
Her own electorate, I think.
Yes. You know, or maybe she should put on a coin or something, and we love that idea.
Yeah, well, I'm actually quite surprised, just like you both are, that A, we're not taught about her in school, that B, and I understand that really it was not until 1980 that her book was credited finally to her. So we are only talking about, how many years, 40 years or so, whatever. And yeah, I mean, I suppose in that 40 years, we've got a lot of catching up to do now to celebrate this extraordinary woman and the path that she has paved for other women and other writers in this country is quite extraordinary. I agree. I think she should be on a coin or have a street named after her.
Maybe a stamp would be nice.
A stamp?
Do we still have stamps?
Stamp would be
That's
lovely.
a great idea.
A stamp would be lovely, and you could encourage people to actually do handwritten notes to other important women in their life.
Oh, what a lovely idea. I love that.
She's wonderful. So I'm really glad that you both got to write this extraordinary book, and I cannot thank you enough for sharing it with the world and for sharing Charlotte's story with us. I highly recommend that everybody go out and buy this book, read this book, and make sure you know who she is, because Charlotte Waring is just an extraordinary Charlotte Waring Atkinson is an extraordinary pioneer for us in this country. And as you say, a feminist in times when it certainly was not the norm, and especially in the colonies of Australia, that's for sure. And she's overcome extraordinary stuff. As you said, and rightly so, Kate, this story is so relevant in terms of feminism even today and how important it is.
Right,
yeah. Do you think, one last question, do you think that Charlotte, if she could be here with us right now, do you think she'd be shocked that A, what she did was so remarkable, and B, do you think she should be shocked that not very much has really, like a lot has changed for women, but in actual fact, some things have not really changed for women?
I think that Charlotte was actually a very humble person. So we had this interesting thing where when we were thinking about her, we felt like she was with us, and we felt like she was showing us the way often, and that all these serendipitous things happen, and we would say, "Oh, Charlotte's shown us the way again." But I actually think she would be perhaps she wouldn't expect to be celebrated, and she was just doing what she thought was right, what she believed in for her own family. I don't think that she was necessarily trying to change the world for all women the way we would think about it, the way we would think about it now. But I think she would be just absolutely thrilled to see how far we have come with, girls' education, with women's rights, with women's careers, with that women now can have such an enormous range of careers that in her day, really, you could be a teacher or a governess, and for an educated woman, there weren't very many other options.
I think Charlotte would say, look how far we have come. Look how much we have achieved. Look how much further we have to go. Take up the fight, girls. Let's change the world for the better.
Oh, we're definitely with Charlotte on that one, I think. So this is a stunning, stunning work of art, ladies. It's a really beautiful book. And I cannot imagine anyone reading this and not being moved by Charlotte's story and by the gorgeous way that you have taken us on your journey as well to search for all the facts behind her life.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having us on today. It's been such a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Sandy. It's been gorgeous.
It's been lovely talking to you, ladies, and looking forward to seeing what else comes up.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Enjoy
Bye,
the rest
ladies.
of your day.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks for listening to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. The Good Girl Confessional podcast can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen to your quality podcasts. We chat to really interesting women telling their amazing stories. But it really helps us if you can subscribe, like, and share the podcast. Thanks so much for all of your support. Bye for now.